There's a fight happening right now over something you've probably never thought about. Not over oil, not over chips, over who gets to create the next dollar that enters the global economy. And the weird part? The dollar isn't even printed by the people you think. Most people believe the US government prints dollars, that the Treasury Department fires up the printing press whenever it needs cash. That's not how it works. The government can't just print money, it has to borrow it from someone else, and that someone else gets to decide how much that borrowing costs. Here's what actually happens. When the US government needs money, it issues bonds, Treasury bonds. Those bonds are IOUs. The government promises to pay you back with interest. But where does the money come from to buy those bonds in the first place? That's where it gets strange. The Federal Reserve, a private institution that's technically independent from the government, buys those bonds, not with money it has, with money it creates out of nothing. They call it expanding the balance sheet. You could also call it printing money, but they don't like that phrase. When the Fed buys a $10 billion bond, 10 billion new dollars enter the system, digitally, instantly. So the government borrows from the Fed, and the Fed creates the money to lend. It's a loop, a closed loop that's been running for over a century. And for a long time, this loop was invisible to most people. It worked quietly in the background. But something changed. In 2008, the Fed bought $1.7 trillion in bonds and mortgage-backed securities to stop the financial crisis. By 2020, that number had grown to over $7 trillion. In 2 years during the pandemic, the Fed's balance sheet doubled. They printed more money in 24 months than in the previous century combined. And suddenly, the loop wasn't invisible anymore. Now other countries are watching, because the dollar isn't just America's currency, it's the world's reserve currency. 70% of global trade is settled in dollars. Oil is priced in dollars. Debt is issued in dollars. If you want to buy anything significant on the international market, you need dollars, which means the Fed isn't just printing America's money, it's printing the world's money. And that gives the US an absurd advantage. When other countries print money, they get inflation, capital flight, currency collapse. When the US prints money, the world absorbs it. For now. But here's the tension. China holds over $800 billion in US Treasury bonds. Japan holds over $1 trillion. They're funding American spending. And every time the Fed expands its balance sheet, every time it creates new dollars out of thin air, it dilutes the value of the dollars they're holding. It's a slow, quiet transfer of wealth, and they know it. So China started experimenting. Digital yuan, oil contracts priced in renminbi, bilateral trade agreements that bypass the dollar entirely. Russia and India are settling trades in rupees. Saudi Arabia is in talks to accept yuan for oil. These aren't just policy shifts, they're escape attempts. Because the real war isn't military, it's monetary. Whoever controls the currency that the world needs controls the flow of global capital. And for 80 years, that's been the United States. But the math is starting to crack. The U.S. national debt is over $36 trillion. The interest payments alone are now over $1 trillion a year. That's more than the defense budget. And to pay that interest, the government has to borrow more, which means issuing more bonds, which means the Fed has to buy more bonds, which means printing more money. The loop accelerates. At some point, the world stops accepting this deal, not because they want to, because they have to. When your trading partner is financing itself by diluting the currency you're paid in, eventually you find another currency, or you build one. And that's what's happening in the shadows right now. A silent war over who gets to print the next dollar, or whether the next unit of global value will even be called a dollar at all. The question isn't whether this system is sustainable. The question is how long the rest of the world will keep pretending it is.